Let's move on to what might replace that situation. In a recent interview with Voice of America, you proposed that in the future, Iran has an elected monarch. Tell me how this system might work in your mind.
Well, the principle is essentially a democratic system which is based on sovereignty and the will of the people, like everywhere else in the world when we see democratic governments, irrespective of its final form. You have countries that are republics, you have countries that are parliamentary monarchies, from Japan to Sweden to Germany to the United States, albeit they are slightly different from one another because of the specificities of that particular nation and its population and its fabric, if you will. So the basic principle here is that whatever in the future we would like to attain in a secular democratic alternative to a theocracy that we are currently having in our country is for the people of Iran to ultimately decide the final form, so long as the content is democratic. Which is why I have asked my fellow compatriots, whether Republicans or monarchists, that in the future to put forth their best model or proposition as to what the final form could be, so that the Iranian people this time would clearly have all the alternatives and options available to them before they cast their final vote in a referendum to ultimately determine the final form. So this is the real principle that we need to think of, and the democratic process will take care of the rest. In other words, once the regime collapses, we anticipate a period of transition where a temporary government will have to manage the country's affairs, while a constituent assembly will draft a new constitution, put to debate all these issues that are to be discussed, so that the people of Iran ultimately have a choice of how and what they will determine the future. My issue, however, is that whatever the final form, the premise has to be something that ends up being a choice or a selection or an election by the people, in order to have full legitimacy and be consistent with democratic principles.
So it's a way of uniting Republicans and monarchists. Is that how you see it? Is that a viable power bloc within the Iranian political system?
In a pluralistic society such as Iran, it is obvious that regardless of your ideological preferences, what transcends political divisions is the national interest and commonality of collective survival in a democratic system. Without a democracy, without human rights, we cannot achieve all the goals of peace, stability, and progress. That's a precondition to Iran's positive future. In that, any Iranian, regardless of opinion, have a common platform and agenda, I believe.
What role would you see for yourself in this? Do you see yourself as this elected monarch? Or would you support an alternative candidate, perhaps somebody who can unite the Iranian people? What do you think?
I have said to my fellow compatriots throughout the years, I'm not running for any office. The only mission that I have in life is to assist the process of reaching the point that I was talking about, where people can ultimately choose for themselves their future. My only mission in life is to get to that finish line, which is the liberation of Iran, and post this regime have an opportunity to establish a new secular democratic system in our country. That day will be the end of my political mission in life.
Current circumstances, what would your advice be to the Biden administration to achieve the best results from where we are now?
There is a direct correlation between the regime backing down and the amount of pressure exerted on it. We have seen, in fact, that for the most part, increased pressure on the regime has forced it to either curtail its ability to do whatever it wanted to do. Any relaxation, to the contrary, emboldens it and enables it to further its constant state of creating instability in the region, as we have recently witnessed in the recent clashes where rockets have been fired on Israel and things of that nature, and of course Yemen and many other examples we can point to. As a whole, while attempting to find a solution, albeit just limited to the nuclear issue, which should not be limited to it, and that's a different argument altogether, but you cannot have any sense of net result by going back to the same concept where today probably half of the components of the former JCPOA have expired, and you're trying to get same results with lesser means. In other words, the status quo is not favoring the world, but it's favoring the regime, unless something in the dynamics of that changes. And I think the only way to be able to at least get more results is not by laxing pressure, but to the country exerting pressure. This is not just from the point of view of the outside we're looking in. It is also in the interest of a population that is paying the price every time the regime gets a second breath. Throwing the regime a lifeline is not the way to go. It will be net lose-lose for the people of Iran and the free world, only to the benefit of the regime.